Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Namo Buddhaya, and welcome to another broadcasting of Shraddha Media Network. Today's broadcasting is sponsored by a family in Sweden consisting of Mrs. Kudahettige Nielsen, Mr. Robert Nielsen, and Mr. Aston Nielsen. The main reason behind sponsorship is to wish Master Nielsen longevity, good health, happiness, welfare, and the association of noble friends on his 13th birthday. A long time ago, when the Buddha was alive, he was living in solitary retreat deep in the forests of northern India. And the Buddha from time to time would take solitary retreat where he wouldn't be spending time with the main proportion of monks. He would live in the forest and meditate under the shade of a tree. And one day, when he was living in the forest, a young man from a family called the Lichavis came to visit the Buddha. He came, bowed, and sat down to one side, like most disciples do. And what he did, instead of asking any questions, he sat down and started praising the Buddha, sentence and sentence of praise. And after he was done praising, the Buddha kept quiet. He didn't say anything at first. He remained completely unmoved to the flattery that he was receiving. The Buddha waited for a little while and he said something very special to this Lichavi prince. He said, "You should never ever believe anything in this world just because it's been carried by oral tradition. Just because through inferential reasoning and logical reasoning, it sounds merely correct. You shouldn't believe anything in the world just because it's been said by something famous, by someone famous. And also, you should not believe the things in the world, the philosophies, the sciences, just because it runs in your family. Just because your mum and dad have been carrying it from their grandfathers and from their grandparents. The Buddha says, these aren't the reasons why you should believe. The reason you should believe anything in the world is when you know through your own wisdom, through your own understanding, that this is good and this is bad, that this is meritorious and this is demeritorious, that this is blameless and this is blameworthy, this is wholesome and this is unwholesome. Only when you see for yourself, the Buddha says, you should accept anything, accept any view that someone else tells you. When it comes to, for us anyway, when it comes to choosing the philosophy that we decide to live our lives by, or the political party that we choose to follow, or maybe the religious views that we adopt in our lifetimes, these things that we choose to follow are influenced by so many things in our lives. They're influenced by the experiences that we have along the way. Sometimes it can be through school, through university, through a workplace, or a journey to a different country that you went to. Sometimes people like to mix and match. What they do is they look at different aspects of religion from different places, and they pick and choose some of the things that they enjoy. This can be from Christianity, some people like gospel. From Hinduism, they take the mantras. From Buddhism, they love the meditation. And then from Islam, the devoted worship is something that they take for themselves. And another way we develop our beliefs and the philosophies that we like to live our life by, more often than not, is through our family lineage, our family traditions. They carry our practices, our morals, our precepts. As Buddhists, from time to time, we have to ask ourselves, why am I Buddhist? And if the answer is, it's because it's been carried in our family lineage. It's because my mum and dad are Buddhist. We've been Buddhist for generations. The truth is, in the eyes of the Buddha, you're not actually a Buddhist yet. This problem obviously didn't exist 2,600 years ago. Back then, there weren't generations, family generations of 7 or 8 generations of Buddhists like there are today. You would become a Buddhist by conversing with the Buddha himself or one of his immediate disciples. And it would be a series of questions and answers. And what you would do you would argue with him. You would have dialect with him. You'd reason with him. And you'd either walk away a person who believes in Buddhism or a person who doesn't. But although the problem of inherited religious views, inherited Buddhism, didn't exist back then, it does exist today. So we do have to question ourselves. Why do we believe the Buddha? Why do we believe what the Buddha has to say? When we choose a philosophy or religion that we want to follow in our lives, a religion should be able to solve our problems. It should be able to deal with our life problems that we throw at it. It should provide us comfort, in a sense. A religion should be able to illustrate the different array of problems that it can address. This has to be a range of things, that it covers a wide range of people. Secondly, it should show the cause behind each of these problems. Why do these problems exist? Thirdly, it should show the cause being removed, causing the problem to be removed. When you remove the cause, the problem should go away. And it should also include a group of people who, in fact, have succeeded in removing the cause, and a group of people who have solved their problems. And most importantly, it should have a clear methodology, a clear practice on how to remove the cause. There should be a pathway. And that's the fourth thing. The Buddha's teaching is centralized. If you look at the 84,000 discourses that he's spoken of, everything points at one thing. And that thing is what we call the Four Noble Truths. The first noble truth is the noble truth of suffering. The Buddha explains his array of sufferings. He explains what the world goes through in suffering. The second noble truth is the noble cause of suffering. He explains that craving, lust, hatred, and delusion are the causes of all suffering. The third noble truth is the cessation of suffering. This illustrates to us when you remove lust, hatred, and delusion, or craving, it takes away the suffering. And lastly, and most importantly, there's something called the Noble Eightfold Path. And that truth is called the path leading to cessation. And this path, when practiced by a disciple, leads to the removal of the cause. But seeing suffering is all well and good, but the Buddha is very famous for his talk on rebirth, for his talk on reincarnation. How can you believe in something like rebirth and reincarnation? You can't possibly see it. Science hasn't been able to prove it. So how does it believe in these rebirth stories and the concept of reincarnation? I like to think of it like this. Imagine your 10th grade biology teacher at school. She will put up a slide on her projector and show you a plant. She'll zoom in on the plant and show you a plant cell, saying that this is inside this plant. And she will say, this plant cell consists of cell membranes, a large vacuole, a cell wall. It will consist of a nucleus. It will consist of mitochondria, which secrete ATP. And when your biology teacher is telling you this at the 10th grade level, do you ever doubt your biology teacher? No. Do you ever think that, no, she's lying to me? Plant cells don't have these things. A plant doesn't have these things. She's lying to me. She's not telling the truth. I can't see it, so I'm not going to believe it. Do we ever think these thoughts when a teacher tells us these? Why? It goes back further. The answer goes back further. From a young age, we are given the idea that a teacher is trustworthy and a teacher is telling the truth, is one that speaks the truth. This happens when a teacher, when we're younger, she uses the things in the world that we can see. She puts two sticks together and shows us that 1 + 1 = 2. An inevitable truth. She'll mix the colors blue and yellow and show us that it makes green. And we can't deny these things. And she bases a platform of trust. And she can use that faith that we have in her, that we've developed, so that she can tell us that a plant cell does contain these things. We believe her when it comes to that point. In the same way, the Buddha's teaching doesn't start with rebirth. That's not where you begin. You begin by seeing suffering. Suffering, this is the starting point of Buddhism. So how can one see suffering? How can he see the Four Noble Truths? He has to see the cause and effects working together. He assesses his own suffering in his own life, and he sees whether, if this is caused by craving, if it's caused by greed, if it's caused by hatred and delusion. We'll throw in an example. Imagine the materialistic desire to want a house, a new big house. And unfortunately, you can't afford it and you can't get it. And because you can't get it, you experience suffering. A wise disciple sees that the greed for the house is what causes the suffering. Another person goes to work and has to associate with people that he or she doesn't like. And it upsets her or him, and it causes suffering. A wise disciple sees that it's hatred that's producing that suffering, not anything else. When we get old, we experience bodily pains, physical pain, and because of that, we experience mental pain. The wise disciple sees it's the desire for youth, it's the desire for the young life again that makes us not like suffering of old age. When we're going through periods of sickness and we're suffering, it's the desire for health that's producing that suffering. And what a person starting with Buddhism does is he constantly analyzes the suffering. And as he constantly does so, and it doesn't mean it's for 1 day, for 2 days, it's for a period of time, he assesses the suffering. And behind every suffering, he starts seeing that the cause is craving. And once he starts seeing this constant truth, he uses this existential truth as a platform to believe in the other teachings of the Buddha, to believe in things like rebirth. But does this mean that a Buddha's disciple never sees rebirth for himself? Does he never see himself being born again or his previous lives? Does he always rely on faith? No. Just like a biology student develops and moves on from mid-school and the 10th grade, he educates himself further in the sciences. And he might one day make it to university. And when he gets there, he gets given an electron microscope. And then for himself, he can put a slide into the microscope and he will see the plant cell for himself. Just like that, a disciple who follows Buddhism, he develops the path. He develops the path that is what we call virtue, concentration, and wisdom, the Noble Eightfold Path. And as he does this, as he develops, he gets to see rebirth for himself. But this begs another question. Any philosophy in the world, or any religion in the world that we read into, it can base falsehoods on a fundamental truth. It can use our trust in the wrong way and tell us about things that we don't believe in and aren't necessarily true. The struggle with believing rebirth isn't something that we're experiencing just in the 21st and the 20th century. It did exist back then. Even when the Buddha was alive, it existed. A long time ago, there was this king called Payasi. And he was a strange man. And he decided to test rebirth for himself. And he used experiments to do so. He was a radical king. And the experiments that he did were they were completely inhuman. But he had a desire to figure this out for himself. And he did experiments like putting prisoners who were put on death row into huts of boiling water. He'd close the lid, boil the water, and wait until they were dead, and lift the lids up slowly. And he would peek in to see if the souls would leave from the lid. He did a total of about 8 or 9 experiments. And after they had all finished, he did come to the conclusion that rebirth doesn't exist. But he was fortunate to come across one of the Buddha's disciples, an enlightened monk called Kumara Kassapa. Kumara Kassapa, the enlightened monk, was the foremost in his eloquence for teaching the Dhamma. And this king approached Kumara Kassapa, the Venerable One, sat down to one side and told him of the experiments. The 2 experiments that I want to tell you about today are about the 2 realms, heaven and hell. The king does a strange experiment. What he does is he goes to his bad friends, his unvirtuous friends, the friends that did not protect the precepts and then constantly did the blameworthy and the unwholesome things. And he waited until they got old. Once they had got old, he went to their deathbeds and whispered in their ear, "You, my friend, are a bad person. You have not done any good in your life. You have not been virtuous and kind to others. If there is a place such as hell in this realm, in this universe, you will most certainly go there. Once you do, my friend, please come back and tell me. Please come back and visit me and tell me the experiences of hell, so I can too believe in this hell world." "O Venerable One, I told these to my friends, but none of my friends actually came back. Therefore, I don't believe in rebirth." The Venerable One gave a reply to this, Kumara Kassapa, and he said, "King, imagine this. Imagine a person that you've just caught stealing in your kingdom. Not just small things, stealing from families, stealing from crops, stealing from stores. And you decide to give him a punishment, and that punishment being execution. Before he is executed, he's escorted round the city without any clothes, to the beat of a drum. And while he's being escorted, he's thrown abuse, verbal abuse and physical abuse. And he's paraded all around the city. And after he's paraded, he's taken to the execution ground. And once he's taken to the execution ground, there are two dreadful men, large, heartless men, who are there to execute him. In his last moments, when he's been tied in chains and he's about to put his head on the block, if he looks up at his executioner, the master executioner, and asks, "My friend, I wish to go see someone. Please let me." Would the executioner let him go and see his friend, or would they just chop off that talkative man's head? The king says, "O venerable one, they would most certainly just chop off that talkative man's head." So, king, even in your realm, the human realm, where there is happiness, if a person who does bad cannot go visit a friend when he's being given his final torture, what is the chance of a person in hell being able to come back and visit his friend? After this argument, King Payasi still doesn't believe in the realms of hell. He argues again, "Venerable Enlightened One, Kumara Kassapa, I also did another experiment. I went to some of my good friends and I said, 'You've done good things in your life. You've done the wholesome things, the virtuous things. You've given things to other people. You've helped other people. You've looked after the elderly. You've respected whom to be respected and whom you ought to respect. You've done good things in your life.' And he would whisper in his ear when he was about to die that you are going to heaven if there is such a place. When you go there, come back and visit me. Come back and tell me that there is this place so that I can believe in heaven myself and I can believe in rebirth." Oh, Venerable, none of these people returned. None of them came back from the heavens. Therefore, I don't believe in heaven. The eloquent elucidator of the Dhamma says this. He says, "O king, imagine this. Imagine a man that's fallen into a cesspit full of feces, a deep cesspit, and his mouth, his eyes, his ears, his nose is all coated in feces. His body is completely coated in feces, where there is not a single follicle of hair which hasn't been dirtied by the feces itself. And after some time in that hole, a good man would come to him and assist him out of it. And after he was out of the hole, they would bathe him in scented water, in fragrant water. And they would give him food, drink, and clothing, fresh linen white clothes. And after this, he would be given your kingdom. He would be given the palace, the maidens, and the royal queen. And he would be given the 5 chords of sensual pleasure to indulge in. And after he has indulged for 100 years, if you were to invite him back to the cesspit, would he ever agree to do so?" The king replies, "That man would never come back." Just like that, the heavenly beings compare their world to our world just like that man who got given the kingdom compares it to the cesspit. Although the human realm doesn't seem like a place that's truly that bad for us, it does appear to be a bad place for people like the heavenly beings. In this way, King Payas, he explains all of his 10 experiments to Kumara Kassapa. And after he's explained these, he leaves a believer of rebirth. He believes in the other realms. The truth is, when it comes to the Dhamma, it has all the answers that we're looking for. When it comes to the Buddha's teaching, it has everything that we're looking for. But the thing is, we just haven't found them yet. The Buddha is known to have 2 physical eyes, just like the rest of us, and 4 internal eyes. And this is very special to the Buddha. The first eye is the eye of the Buddha. The second is the all-seeing eye. The third one is the eye of wisdom. The fourth one is the divine eye. And the fifth one is the normal flesh eye that we have. The Buddha's normal flesh eye can see a distance of 10 kilometers in the dark. But it's actually the divine eye that he uses to see the rebirth, to see the reincarnation of himself and the reincarnation of other beings. The divine eye is something that comes with a cause. It's an effect through a series of practices. The Buddha teaches us to develop the divine eye so we can see rebirth ourselves. And in a wonderful discourse that is found in the numerical discourses of the Buddha, what we call the Anguttara Nikaya, there's a discourse that explains the process to us. And it says something like this. It says, a disciple first starts assessing suffering for himself, and based on the truth of suffering, he develops what we call faith. Based on that faith, he starts assessing the reality of this world. He's observing the world at a constant rate. He's paying careful attention to the rises and the falls. This is what we call yoniso manasikare, careful attention. As he's paying careful attention, he then becomes extremely mindful. He's watching the world with supreme mindfulness. As he's developing his mindfulness, he then starts restraining his sense faculties. His eye, his ear, his nose, his tongue, his body, and his mind. He actively moves away from the unwholesome. He doesn't let anything unwholesome enter his 6 faculties. And as he's restraining his 6 faculties, he becomes good in bodily conduct. He becomes good in verbal conduct. And he becomes good in mental conduct. He doesn't kill animals. He doesn't steal. He doesn't sexually misconduct. He doesn't tell lies. He doesn't drink alcohol. He doesn't tell gossip. He doesn't speak idle talk. He doesn't talk about things that separate loved people from each other. He has a mind free from greed. He doesn't have wrong view. And he develops the triple conduct. When the triple conduct is being established, the next thing that comes to effect is the 4 factors of mindfulness. His mindfulness in body, his mindfulness in feeling, in mind, and the wholesome states. The 4 factors of mindfulness then fuel something what we call, which I won't go into, the 7 factors of enlightenment, the Sapta Bojjhangas. When he's practicing these dhammas, something very special happens in his mind. In our mind, we have something called the 5 hindrances. The Buddha describes the 5 hindrances as the makers of blindness. He says, imagine a pool of water which has beautiful shoals of fish and colored pebbles at the bottom. but the water is cloudy, it's muddy, and you can't see everything at the bottom. A mind with hindrances is like the cloudy pool. You can't see reality. The 5 hindrances are sensual desire, anger, laziness, restlessness and remorse, and skeptical doubt. Once these 5 things have been removed by the practice of the path, he can see the shoals of fish, and he can see the mind. As he sees the mind for what it really is, as he develops meditation, he gets more control of it. And the Buddha says something special here. He says as he practices meditation away from the 5 hindrances, his mind becomes steady. It becomes malleable. It becomes wieldy. It becomes luminous. And it becomes concentrated. It becomes unified. And when this happens, he can direct his mind into the stream of consciousness. He can direct it into seeing manifold past lives. First, he'll see 1 rebirth of himself in the past. He will see 2, he will see 3, he will see 10, he will see 20, 50, 100, and he will even see 1,000 and 100,000. He will see the cycles of the earth in its evolution and its dissolution. He starts to see rebirth for himself. Just like that university student who got the electron microscope and he got to see the plants for himself, the disciple now sees for himself. He doesn't need to rely on faith anymore. Think of it like this. Imagine a man goes in to a dark room and he switches on a light. When he switches on the light, he approaches a book and starts reading it. And he remembers it. And he turns off the light. Just because he's turned off the light, does it take away what he took from the book, his understanding of the book? No. It doesn't rely on the light anymore. It's his own understanding. If the light goes away, the understanding doesn't go away. Last year, I was living in a monastery in central Sri Lanka, and it's home to where our teacher is, the one that ordained us, our teacher, our preceptor. And he was sitting in the main reception hall, and he was speaking with a lady well into her mid-40s. And this lady had first come to the monastery 20 years ago and hadn't come back since. But at home, she had practiced the Dhamma herself. She started practicing virtue, concentration, and wisdom. And through her meditation practice, she did start seeing her previous lives. She didn't see thousands, she saw 4. Our teacher told us about the experience afterwards, and he explained to us what this woman saw. She saw that she was born in World War I as an army officer in Hitler's army in Germany. And he, at that time, was working in the concentration camps that they used to torture the Jewish community in. And before these Jewish innocent people were put into their gas chambers, they were given a numbered seal that was often burnt onto their skin. And his job was to apply that seal onto these people. And this lady in meditation started to see this life. And specifically, she remembered a woman he had abused at the time. He remembered before that he burnt a seal onto her skin before she was supposed to be killed. She abused her. That lifetime ended, and then she was born again in southern India. At a young age, 19, 20 years old, she went to the Middle East to work. She was from a very poor family, and she was actually sent to Israel, the homeland of the Jewish community. And the job that he received was to look after this old woman. And in meditation, she could remember how she looked after her. She saw one day that she bathed her. She bathed her, and while she was bathing her, on her arm, she saw a numbered seal. The same seal for one of the concentration camps. What had happened was that woman that she tortured in the previous lifetime hadn't died. She was born again. She was born again in India, and the escaped Jewish lady had come back to her home country, and she was now an old, frail woman. As a karmic consequence of abusing her, she was born again, and she had to look after that woman. She again died from this lifetime, and then she was born as an elephant in Sri Lanka, in one of the forests in the central provinces. She died from that lifetime, and again, she was born into this lifetime that she is in now. Her husband now is the same woman that she abused in that previous lifetime. She told our head monk that the husband now abuses her, physically abuses her, and that now she wants to become a monk. After all of this, the most interesting thing is our teacher sat us all down, the community of monks and the laity, and he asked us, would you like to see your previous lifetimes? Would you like to see what you were before? And he said, the Buddha in his discourses says, the amount of lifetimes that you have cried for the death of your mother, the amount of tears that you have shed is greater than the oceans in the world. That is your previous life. The amount of tears that we have shed from the loss of a father in all of the cycle of births and deaths is greater than the oceans. The number of times we have been beheaded as animals, if you accumulate the blood in total, it is greater than the 4 great oceans. That is your previous life. The starting point is seeing suffering as an existential truth. And it's not an easy thing to do. It's very difficult. The Buddha once sees a group of young princes, and he was standing with his chief attendant, Venerable Ananda. And these princes were firing arrows through a small keyhole. And the attendant of the Buddha said, wow, these youths are very talented. They're very skilled in this archery. The Buddha then asks his attendant, Venerable Ananda, what's harder? Firing through a keyhole or firing at a horsehair and splitting it exactly into 7? Venerable Ananda looked shocked and he said, splitting a hair into 7 is so much more of a difficult task than firing through a keyhole. It can't even be compared. The Buddha said, understanding the 4 Noble Truths, seeing suffering for yourself is even harder than this, is even more difficult than this. Back at university, I tried to speak to a friend about the suffering in the world. And he was studying philosophy at the time. And at the end, the only thing that he said was, Buddhism is so pessimistic, it's always looking at suffering. It looks too much at suffering. You don't need to look at life that way. But the idea of a pessimist and an optimist, the half glass full and the half glass empty, I like to think of it like this. Imagine you're in a scorched desert with no food, and you have a bottle of water that's half empty. The truth is, someone coming along and telling you that it's half full is useless to you. It doesn't help you in any way. because of that suffering. That is true and that is there. Maybe pessimism is closer to realism than it is to optimism. The Buddha himself actually assesses the extent to which happiness goes and the extent to which suffering goes. He sees ultimate happiness through his divine eye, and he saw ultimate suffering of beings through his divine eye too. And he compared the two. And because the suffering in our lives is truly greater than the small hits of happiness that we get, this is why the Buddha puts forth the relinquishing of lust, the relinquishing of hatred, and the relinquishing of delusion, the relinquishing of craving. But the point is, suffering is hard to see, it's difficult to see. But once you do, it opens up the doorway to the rest of the Buddha's teaching. In Pali, the Buddha uses the word to describe nibbana, the word to describe enlightenment, as suddhasan. He says nibbana is subtle. It's difficult to see. It's not easy. But he says, I say practice the wholesome and extinguish suffering because it can be done, not because it can't be. I say, don't practice the unwholesome and relinquish suffering because it can be done, not because it can't. The Buddha has 4 qualities called the intrepidities. And one of them which I'll read out to you. He says, I see no ground on which any person on this great earth or anyone in all the worlds who could accuse me by saying, when someone practices the path to Nibbana, it does not lead him to the destruction of suffering. And because I see no ground in this, I abide in total fearlessness. In the world, you get loads of famous people. You get loads of companies and establishments and organizations who often get their personal teams, their closest associates, to cover them up for the bad things that they do, for the illegal things that they do, for the lies that they tell. But the Buddha says to his disciples, to the monks, not even to the laity, he says to the monks, bhikkhus, I don't want you to cover me up, and I don't expect you to either. The Buddha says, 3 things in the world shine when exposed. The sun shines when it is exposed, not when it is covered. The moon shines when it is exposed, when it is not covered. The Dhamma shines when it is exposed and when it is not covered. But no matter how much the Dhamma shines, when exposed, you can't see it through blind faith. To see the Buddha's teaching, you have to do it through your own understanding. May the contents of this broadcast be able to help you in understanding the 4 noble truths in the Gautama Buddha's dispensation. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Today we want to share the merits of broadcasting this Dhamma sermon, firstly with the heavenly deities. May all the deities in the Buddhist dispensation who protect us, may they be able to understand the 4 noble truths in the Gautama Buddha's dispensation. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. We also wish to share these merits with our teacher and preceptor at Mahamiranawa, Pinwat Lukusami Mahansi. May he be long in lifespan, in good health, in happiness and welfare. And may he be able to understand the 4 noble truths in the Gautama Buddha's dispensation. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. We also wish to share these merits with the sponsors of this broadcast, and that is Mrs. Kudahettige Nielsen, Mr. Robert Nielsen, and Mr. Aston Nielsen. And the main reason behind the sponsorship is to wish Mr. Aston Nielsen a very happy birthday, and we all wish him longevity, good health, happiness, welfare, and the association of noble friends on his 13th birthday. We also want to share these merits with the late father, Buddhadasa Kudahettige, who departed 10 years ago to this date. We also want to share these merits with all the ancestors and departed loved ones of the family that sponsored this video. May all these past relatives live happily, abide happily in their new lives, and may they be able to attain the Four Noble Truths in the Gautama Buddha's dispensation. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. The sponsors want to share these merits, especially with Mrs. Ranjani Pereira, who's living in Ganemula, Sri Lanka. We all wish her longevity, good health, happiness, welfare, and for her to be able to understand the Four Noble Truths. We also wish Master Aston's cousins and relatives across Sri Lanka and Sweden, and we also too wish them longevity, good health, happiness, welfare, the association of noble friends, and may they be able to succeed in their education study, and one day be able to attain the Four Noble Truths in the Gautama Buddha's dispensation. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. We share all the merits with all the sponsors of this broadcasting, and to those in their family, to the children and everyone who has helped them in their lifetime. May they be able to attain the Four Noble Truths in the Gautama Buddha's dispensation. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. We also share these merits with all the resident monks at Mahamilna Buddhist Monastery, to all the monks progressing in this wonderful dispensation, to all the Anagarika nuns, to all the trainees in expectation of ordination, to all the team at the Shraddha Media Network, and to the monthly donors and benefactors of the Shraddha Media Network. May all of these meritorious people be able to attain the Four Noble Truths in the Gautama Buddha's dispensation. Namo Buddhaya.
මෙවැනි වටිනා ධර්ම දේශනා ශ්‍රවණය කිරීමට ශ්‍රද්ධා ඩේලි YouTube චැනලය සබස්ක්‍රයිබ් කරන්න.